Howdy, folks. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. It actually is not raining here, but it's raining in lots of places, but
it's
not
here.
raining
by me either, and my contractor wasted a whole day, but let's not talk about that.
You're going to be getting it pretty soon because the hurricane, the remnants of the hurricane will crawl up the East Coast. I can just say, though, it was August the 7th, and I woke up this morning, and it was 62 degrees outside, and I'm like, after, Bill Toes told me he's like, it's 100 where he is. We were at the draft and it was 105. And every time the wind blew, it felt like a hair dryer. No, thanks. I'll take 62. I'm happy. Anyway, Russ, start us off the pre-show.
Yeah. So I saw something funny on Twitter and I perpetuated a fraud. And now I'll tell everybody what the fraud is. So they were like, name your favorite football player from a small school. And I put Bobby Jones, Texaco Tech. Thing is, there is no school called Texaco Tech. When he was on Monday Night Football, he made the Jets as a walk-on, like a tryout, like Vince Papale. He was in no college football team, no previous experience. He ended up playing in
high school, and that was it.
May have played in high school, but nothing college, no pro experience of any kind. And he made it as a walk-on, and he played for like 8-9 years. And so on Monday Night Football, he decided to make that up because, they would always make you say your school. And I remember laughing at that. Like, this is really smart. Like, instead of just saying undrafted or walk-on, he made up the fictitious school, Texaco Tech. And then my wife reminded me, and I don't remember who it was, somebody said the School of Hard Knocks once. And that's pretty good, too.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that who was it? Well, the one thing, like, Bill, you always hear these guys now on Monday Night Football when they go through the crawl, they'll say their high school. They won't say the university. I don't know if it's because they don't like their university anymore or what, but it's like Hutch Tech High School or whatever. Like, what? And like, what are you doing? I don't get that.
I think that kind of started with basketball because they would, although they don't do like player by player, say their school and whatever, but I think so many players left college, left college after a year or whatever,
And that's what it seems like Jones did. He went to Youngstown State Players, and Jaworski actually went there, which is interesting. So he must have left like after he didn't get anywhere on the team. So that's probably what happened.
Jaworski went someplace after that, didn't he? He was at a major college, I thought.
I don't know, but he was my boss once when I used to work at the old Hilton / Holiday Inn.
Ron Jaworski.
I have a Jaworski story, but I can't tell it on the air.
Okay. I can tell this one.
He's from Lackawanna. He's from around Buffalo. So.
Yeah, but here's the thing. So him and Bill Berge and a few other people owned the hotel, and so I would see them all the time. And Jaworski had a radio show, a live show, and I was like in front office management. But that guy remembered everybody's name. Anybody he ever came into contact with, he remembered their name and was super nice. Bill Berge, not so nice.
My favorite from a small school, and I'm sure he was one of your favorites, Russ, was former Buffalo Bill Don Beebe.
Oh, Don Beebe. He was a good player, though.
Who was from Chadron State, which I think is in Minnesota. But it's like
heard of it.
Yeah, I know. He went to Western Illinois and then he transferred to Chadron State. So, yes, I remember that when he pile drived himself into the ground that one game against, I think it was Cleveland. He fell right on top, right on his head, pile drived himself, but he was okay. Okay.
I mean, the one other thing. Hold on, I got to get the guy's name now. I'm forgetting. Keep chatting for 1 second.
Well, I'll just regale everyone with this minor story. So, like I said, we were having rain the last few days, and the storm broke, and
I got it.
I went outside into my garage, and I was just checking something in the backyard. I turn around, and all of a sudden, this dog, a neighborhood dog, never have seen it before, like walked right down my driveway and right into my garage. I mean, it was a big dog. It looked like a boxer and something, crossbreed. It wasn't as big as a boxer would be, but it was big. And, I mean, I don't know what this dog is like, so I don't act like I'm scared. And I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And lead him out of the garage. And then I'm thinking like his owner was walking him or something, and he just walked, and there was nobody on the street. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with this dog? And then all of a sudden he ran away. And it's like, it's just bizarre. It's like, they just disappeared. It's like, oh, okay, hey, see ya.
So here's the last one from a small school. Bill will remember a guy who used to cover the Flyers and other things. Dave Uncle, he's no longer with us, but he got us invited to a party with Brian Baldwinger's place, NFL Network and other places. And the thing about this party was Dave was like, listen, you guys went to Nassau Community College together. I'm like, really? Okay. And that was a transient school. Most of the time you worked. I ended up going to night school my last semester, so I could work all day. And people like Seinfeld and Billy Crystal went there. They dropped in, they dropped out. But it became a pretty good school. But anyhow, so I meet him, and he's like, "Hey, did you ever go see me play on the football team?" And I'm like, "Where?" And he goes, "Nassau Community College." I'm like, "What football team?" I mean, I even texted my best friend. And she was like, one of my best friends who went there, and she was like, I didn't know we had a football team. And he thought I was kidding him. And I'm like, Brian, I'm really not kidding you. I had no idea. And it was really funny. He was just like, oh, this guy went to my school. He doesn't even know. But like, we didn't know.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous of these people who went to like big universities. Who, like my friend went to Maryland, and he's like, "Yeah, I went to the same school that Lenny Bias went, or whatever." And me, it's like I went to Buffalo State College, and the only guy who ever made the NBA, NFL, or hockey was Randy Smith, the former Buffalo Brave, who was a really good player. But it's just like it's a Division III school, so nobody's going to make it.
Yeah. See, when I went to Houston, it was loaded with athletes. I mean, because I transferred from that community, and so Carl Lewis used to work out there. Elijah was still working out there until he had his first season. It was just after the Phi Slamma Jamma. So I used to see athletes. I used to eat lunch, and there would be people who are in the Olympics who have won silver medals. Like it's just. Everybody seems to train there or go to school there. So, yeah, that could be interesting.
Go ahead, Bill. Bill, what are you going to say? Oh, I'm sorry.
No. So I went to Temple University, and we had any number of future pro athletes. But a quick story was I had a friend in high school that actually made Temple football, and this was the era when Temple was just brutal. I mean, the football team was just so bad they might go winless during the season.
Wow.
And saw him on campus one time and asked him how's football going. He's like, shh, not so loud. Let's not talk about the football team. So yeah, but I used to see the basketball guys around campus a lot. Donald Hodge and Terrence Stansbury and other guys that. Around. So yeah,
Terrence Stansbury.
Yeah, you're a little too young for Joe Klecko.
No, Joe Klecko, Nick Mickemeyer, those guys were before.
Right.
Nick Mickemeyer, former Bill. Oh my
God.
Hey, Klecko's a Hall of Famer, Jet. There you go.
Nick Mickemeyer's famous claim to fame was the Bills had lost to Miami for 10 straight years, and they lost the last game to the Dolphins 9-7 when Tom Dempsey missed a 20-yard field goal, slipped and fell and missed it. He got cut the next day, and Nick Mickemeyer was the kicker who took the place.
Yeah, but Dempsey made a 63-yarder.
Yeah, but he didn't make that one, so screw him with that block.
Nobody seems to be able to make a kick in Buffalo, but that's just another story for another.
All right. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Wednesday, August 7th, 2024.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Bill Meltzer.
And I'm Michael Agello, and you're not. And this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. I'll just start with this because Johnny read in the chat, I think, earnestly wanted to ask this question, I think, aimed at Russ. If the Rangers wanted to trade Igor, meaning Igor Shesterkin, to Edmonton for Leon Draisaitl, who else would have to go? Everyone give your opinion just for fun. Okay.
It would be straight up, and nobody else would go.
Exactly.
It would be straight up. The salary that Draisaitl would get would be equal to the salary that Igor is getting, but it would be a bad trade for the Rangers because
they have no goalie.
Jonathan Quick's a little too old to man the team full time.
Right. Goalie trades are so funky anyway.
Yeah.
It's such a vital position. Yet goalies are rarely drafted in the first round. Yet their trade value is hard to calculate. It's as a theoretical, it's fun to discuss, but it's so hard to tie a trade into a goalie.
I'll throw this back at Johnny Red. I would say that, okay, if this deal was made, it would have to be a 2-for-2, and Stuart Skinner would have to be part of it to give the Rangers a goalie back.
Yeah.
Now, what would the Rangers give back on top of Shesterkin? Hedel, Kako, maybe. I mean, that would make the deal more realistic, but that's not happening. Okay. All right, let's start with the birthday boy today, Sidney Crosby, who turns 37, which makes me feel real friggin' old because I remember that lottery for him, and, Brian Burke getting pissed off that he finished second and got Bobby Ryan instead of Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
But he's 37 now, but still a phenomenal player and entering the final year of his contract. And Russ, I mean, everybody thought this was going to be like, fait accompli, it's just going to happen, and it hasn't happened yet.
No, I still have a bone to pick with Bobby Ryan saying that King of Pizza's place in like Cherry Hills, the best pizza place. It's not, Bobby. But anyhow, I think what's going on here is like they know they have to sign Sidney Crosby, but they also know that they can't give him like a Stamkos sort of treatment because it would just make them look horrible. They want to rebuild at some point, but the ownership doesn't want them to yet. So they're in a spot where they kind of have to give him 4 or 5 years. And I'm sure that's something Dubas doesn't really want to do. But I think in the end, he's still going to end up with like a 4-year deal. And he'll probably make, $9 million, something respectable. Because he's, honestly, it's funny, but he's still a top 15 player in the league. And all time, he's going to be like a top 5 or 6 player. So, like, you do have to pay him.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, I mean, we thought that Tampa Bay had to pay Steven Stamkos, and then they didn't. Now, I think that, obviously Crosby is different. But, I mean, if I'm Crosby, now maybe he wants to finish his career there. He's spent his entire career there. He was, he's been there since 2005. I get it. If that's your legacy and you want to stay with the same club, I get it. But we know the direction that the Penguins are going. Their core is crumbling. They're all in their late 30s. I don't think they're ever winning a Stanley Cup again with this group. If he wanted to go someplace like play with his buddy Nathan McKinnon in Colorado, he could. But I mean, I don't know. What's your feel on this?
Well, to put it bluntly, Pittsburgh's window is closed.
Yes.
They kept it open as long as they could. They traded away a whole bunch of first-round picks to try to keep that window open as long as they could. The result of that is the farm system is paper thin. Crosby is the franchise there still. He still is their most important player.
Yeah.
And that's no disrespect to Malkin, but Crosby's is their most important player.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the guy that will, fans will still come out to see him, even if the team is a non-contender. I think Pittsburgh is in for a long haul here until they're contenders again. That finally the Bills came due on it. So to me, it's important to sign him because you're not going to get obviously, if you were to move him, let's say you were to sign 2 years, and then we'll look at him, we'll go year by year, right? That kind of thing. You're not going to get the value of a guy that's had the kind of career that he's had.
No.
So you might as well have him for the rest of his career, as long as he wants to be there, and you try to start a rebuild while he's still there. And that
he can mentor a lot of guys.
Yeah, exactly. So he can actually keep a semblance of a culture going.
Right.
Teach guys how to win,
Mm-hmm.
and as you're bringing in young talent, he can fill that role. Yeah. It means sacrificing a chance to contend for a cup again, but I think it's going to be that way either which way. So I honestly think that they should work something. Realistically, how many more years do you want to play? And we'll keep you here for however many years that is. We'll work something out.
I think it's obviously up to him. I think if he wants to stay there, they'll accommodate him. I mean, he's going to have to be flexible in terms of cap because they're, going to need to, bring players in. The only comparable I can think of, because I'm doing a thing regarding best and worst trades for the Hockey News, the Sabres. When Dominic Hasek wanted out of Buffalo, he was the best goalie in the world, but the best that they could get in terms of a trade was Slava Kozlov and a low first-round pick. If he wants to go somewhere, their leverage is almost non-existent. It's like, I'm going to choose to go someplace and you're going to trade me there, and whatever they want to give you for me, that's what's going to happen. It's going to be like the Patrick Kane deal to the Rangers. So
yeah. I mean, here's what I would also propose. Like, Braden Yeager is a really good young center that they drafted a couple years ago. He had a 95-point season last year. He's another one of those guys. He'll be 20 next year. What are you going to do with him? Well, if he has another 100-point season in junior hockey, you might as well sign him and let him start learning from Crosby. Like, I think that's not a bad thing, because you would have Sidney Crosby there, and he could certainly help him.
I didn't think they just signed him to his ELC. So if he's 20, turning 20 before December 31st, playing in Wilkes-Barre probably is where he's going to go, and then maybe
most likely. But he could play 9 games with Crosby. Either way, Crosby could help.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. There was an interesting piece in the Athletic, and I wrote about it for Hockey Buzz about the Leafs and for the Hockey News for the Sabres, because it graded the 32 NHL teams on a number of factors: roster building, cap management, drafting and developing, trading, free agency, and their overall vision. And obviously, like the Florida Panthers, since they won the Stanley Cup, they were number one. And these grades were not from like media; it was from the public and the fan base. So they were number one. Now, I'll just start with the teams that I cover and understand why they were ranked as badly as they were ranked, and deservedly so. Now, even though the Toronto Maple Leafs have made the playoffs 8 years in a row, the fact that they've lost in the first round 7 years in a row and their fan base is frustrated, they were ranked 30th. And now they have been able, with some of their draft picks, with the few draft picks that they've had, to draft a couple good prospects. But that's not enough to sort of feed the engine. And their trades have not been good. The players that they've traded for have walked in free agency after they were rentals, like Ryan O'Reilly or Luke Shen. Now they face the dilemma that they face with Mitch Marner with a year left in his contract and a no-move clause, and they either lose him for nothing or sign him to an extension, which I think is not the direction that they're going to go. So, and that fan base, Bill, they're pissed off. They've spent tons of money on good players like Matthews and Nylander, but they're no closer to the goal that they've been looking for 57 years than they were when they started this rebuild 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's still the residual effect. Go all the way back to signing Tavares. Did they really need Tavares? Right? Big name, obviously an excellent player, but they ended up tying so much of their cap and so much of their planning into 4 players. And all the players are still there, and there's always been a missing piece in there, and they've been missing a piece in the Northeast Division being such a hard, that's such a hard road to come out of the East in the Northeast Division because you have so much competition in there, and Tampa's now on the way down, but Florida rose up,
Boston, Steven,
right, so. It's that group of teams. So if you don't finish first in the division, you're going to play the 3 seed or the 2 seed, depending if which one you are in there. That's a very hard road.
Sorry,
I was going to say, so if you're a defenseman short, if you're a goalie short or something, that's going to get exposed in the playoffs. It's not going to get exposed in the regular season, but in the playoffs, it's a very hard road, and that whole business of being really so tied into 4 guys, which is still something to figure out, that's not going to immediately solve itself.
And they're lucky that Detroit, Buffalo, and Ottawa have spun their wheels, and Montreal's going through an endless rebuild. Otherwise, they'd be, fearful of being able to make the playoffs. But Russ, I've said for years, the bad thing that Dubas did was not signing Tavares. The downfall of that team and what happened to them was partially the pandemic because the cap didn't go up. They were betting on the cap going up, but it was the Nylander contract before Lou could have gotten Nylander extended on a 5 or 6 year deal with a year left on his ELC. He said, no, wait till let him earn his new contract. And then Lou was gone and Dubas had to do it. And then he signed Tavares, Marner, Matthews, and Nylander within the span of, I think, less than a year. Yeah. And then they're screwed. So,
right. We all know that story. That's all true. Can't deny that. But they could have overcome it had they had a great goalie one time during that whole process, which they haven't. And that's been their other thing. They didn't produce one. They didn't trade for the right one. They couldn't afford one. It's all of those things. And now, you're hoping on Joseph Wall, and that's a lot of pressure to put on him. But that's the whole thing, too. It might have worked had they had like a Shesterkin at the start of that.
Sure.
But they haven't. So that's been their other thing.
Yeah, Freddie Anderson, Ilya Samsonov, Jack Campbell, Matt Murray. Anderson was the guy that they were hoping would be the one, and he couldn't win in the playoffs. And then it was stopgaps because they couldn't afford to pay a good one. So this is the weird thing. The Rangers, and I don't fully understand the differentiation between public and fan base. Maybe it means everybody, but the public rankings and grades for the Rangers are all A's and B's, which I agree with. They made the Eastern Conference Final. They're one of the best teams in the league. The fan base gives them C's and D's. Now, is this just a...
No, that makes sense.
It
makes sense because they don't like James Dolan. They don't like the way he projects, himself. They don't like the fact that he's really kind of hands-off with the Rangers and more hands-on with the Knicks. Fans see that. The Ranger fan... and Glenn Sader just left. Remember, he famously said that if he had all of his money to spend, he would win a Stanley Cup every year, and he didn't win it once.
Mm-hmm.
So they've heard all of those things, and they've seen everything, and it's like still with just Brunson and a little bit of hope, now people are like, oh, look at the Knicks again, and then Rangers are just like, they're the most consistent good team they have, and they get overlooked. So that's why the fans act that way.
Yeah. And Bill, the Flyers got C's across the board, except for one B- for drafting and developing, which, honestly, I think, I like some of their prospects. I think that, but they're sort of a middling team right now. So I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. Listen, the Chuck Fletcher era during the Chuck Fletcher era, the biggest mistake was the 2019-20 season, where the Flyers had a pretty damn good regular season. I think they were, before the pandemic hit, I think the Flyers were just a point behind for first place in the division, and then they won the round robin and they ended up as the first seed and had a weird playoff run. They finished one win short of the Eastern Conference Finals, but really they were not very good in the playoff. That was the playoff start. Like Montreal wasn't very good, but the Flyers they relied very heavily on Carter Hart in that series, and they got through that one. And then that Islander series, it went 7 games, but the Flyers weren't even competitive in the 4 games that they lost. So it was a really weird series. But what the Flyers did after that was they kept trying to recapture that year, and they never did. And so they ended up sinking deeper in a hole, making decisions. And some of it was sheer bad luck. Like Ryan Ellis, had Ryan Ellis been healthy,
he was a great player. He was.
He really would have helped the blue line, but you got 4 games out of him, and he's still under contract. So he's only played 4 games. So really, everything just kind of went to hell from there. And so when you had the regime change and Briere came in as the general manager, and Keith Jones as the president of hockey operations, they really had to kind of try to rebuild on the fly.
Yeah.
So I think C's are about right because that's about where they are. The Flyers, Flyers are a team like the high 80s in points last year, really kind of collapsed down the stretch and missed the playoffs. and it's been kind of other than Michkov coming in, as a rookie, it's been a nondescript off season.
Right.
Yeah.
Cam Atkinson was bought out. Flyers haven't been able to make any other moves long term. I don't know. The Flyers are really banking heavily on the 2025 draft, and they're banking heavily on the cap going up moving forward.
And if only Matt Niskanen had come back.
If only, well, that didn't help either. They've been trying to replace Niskanen too,
and they never did, right? Like, that's the weirdest, really one of the weirdest things in sports. Like, I could understand, like, I remember for years I would say, the Rangers are going to have a hard time replacing Brian Leetch. But it's Brian Leetch.
Yeah.
Who's Matt Niskanen?
Yeah.
Eric Johnson's the new Matt Niskanen. Now, just two things quickly, and then we'll go to our list here. Okay. Everybody knows my feelings on the Edmonton Oilers. If the Toronto Maple Leafs had lost in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, no matter how disappointed their fan base would be, I think that they would have given the Leafs grade levels of A's and B's. The Edmonton Oilers got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, and their fan base gave them D's across the board, including except for a C+.
That's not fair.
And one of the reasons is all the good vibes were ended as soon as they hired Stan Bowman as the general manager.
Well, all right. So that's something where I could understand that turning into a public relations problem right out of the gate. And they probably, again, this is where ownership doesn't check in with the fans. And they don't have to. It's not his job to. But if he wants to continue to make money on them, he might want to. And so, Bill, like, that's the thing. He probably, they probably didn't get a good feel how the fans would feel about Stan Bowman. And I guess now we know.
Yeah, no, it's and it's a long-standing thing too. I also think there's nervousness about Draisaitl.
Yeah.
And they really want to win the cup while McDavid is still in his prime. It's funny how time ticks along like that too, because we're a couple of years away from saying, okay, well, he's in his 30s now. Is it going to happen? Well, so I think there's a lot of concern about that.
I think there should be more nervousness about McDavid, because honestly, I think they're going to pay Draisaitl, but I think Draisaitl is going to ask for more than Matthews, which I think he deserves because he's been underpaid the last 8 years. And then are they going to then pay McDavid more than Draisaitl? And I don't think either. I don't think they will, or I think he's going to go someplace else because they haven't won. So
yeah, I think Draisaitl will sign the long-term deal. He really likes it there. Don't blame him. He's a great player, one of the best in the league. And then I think McDavid's going to make Stan Bowman prove it to him. I think he's going to be like, hey, I have interest in signing here, but I'm not doing it yet. Show me what you can do. I think he's
the money
to do that, and he's right to do that.
Show me the money, MFer. That's what.
No, not the money. No, he wants to show me the team building.
Oh, well.
Yeah, it's not the money. They'll pay him the money. It's show me the team building. Get me back to the cup.
Ken Holland didn't exactly show him the team building the last few years. I mean, a lot of hole plugs, but just so Edmonton was 25th and the Sabres were 26th. And the only thing that they got in terms of a passing grade, I mean, I don't consider D passing, was B.
Well, maybe your school in Buffalo, but not mine.
Well, I got A's all the time, Russ. I was a teacher's son, so I got A's all the time.
Yeah,
but they got a C for cap management. Why? Because they can't pay somebody enough to come to Buffalo, and B for drafting and developing, which they've done a good job, definitely. But
yeah, I think they're a B- for that. I think they're pretty good for that.
Yeah. All right. We put together a list, and this is the old summer game that we always play. Usually Anthony is here or Jan is here, but they provided lists, and I provided the list of 10 players
in absentia, yeah.
to our panelists. It's that famous game, 1-year contract, PTO or nada. And we have a bunch of free agents, and it's August 7th, and we'll probably do this like around September the 1st when it's starting to get closer to training camp and these players get desperate. But right now, a list of 10 players, some of them are, have had good careers. Some of them are still young enough to continue their careers, but they are unsigned at this point, and we're wondering whether they'll get another deal. So, okay, we'll start off with longtime Flyer, longtime Leaf last year with the Boston Bruins, James Van Riemsdyk, who I believe had like 11 goals. I know he scored a goal against the Leafs in the
38
playoffs.
points, 11 goals, 27 assists.
11 goals, 27 assists. There you go. So, 1-year contract, PTO or nada, Bill Meltzer.
Well, I think JVR, he ideally would like to play either close to home, or now he and his wife actually make their home in Minnesota. So if it's not even a money issue. If he could get a 1-year deal there, I think he would do that. One of the big things with James is he wanted to achieve silver stick status. So he played his 1,000th game last season.
Mm-hmm.
In a secondary offensive role, he could still help a team.
Mm-hmm.
I would say a 1-year deal, and if he can get it with somewhere relatively close to home, he'd like to win a cup before his career is over. But I think the family part would come first. And I think there's enough left that he could get a 1-year deal.
I could see the Wild with their USA Hockey connections with Bill Guerin saying 1-year contract at veteran minimum $775. Anthony and Jan were both in the same, maybe a PTO, but probably nada. So they're saying they don't think he'll get a deal. Russ, what do you think?
I think a PTO. I mean, again, Minnesota is really up against the cap, so they may not be able to help him. But I think you got to see him because I think, look, he's not the youngest guy anymore. He's certainly not the fastest guy anymore. He's a couple of years removed from getting over 20 goals. So, if you're going to really have him on your roster, it's not so much that he might come and play for cheap. It's just like, hey, what do I have? Is he going to take a spot of a younger player who I could develop rather than putting him out there and, maybe I'm getting 30 points out of him. So I think that's the problem is teams liked him when he was a power play shark. But if he's not going to even be that anymore, now that's going to sort of limit him.
So I can speak to another utility, not this season, but season before last season in Philly in early December, they put him with Morgan Frost, who had been buried in the lineup, and they put him with Tippett. And for the next 8-9 weeks, they were their best line.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, JVR, the time to trade JVR would have been in January. Mm-hmm. When he had a stretch of, I think it was either 14 points in 17 games or maybe 15 points. But that was the time to move him. The Flyers ended up waiting until the deadline, and he hit another really cold spell after the All-Star break, and they ended up not able to move him at all. But just a good team guy. I mean, because anybody who knows James knows he's a really good guy.
Oh yeah,
and it's not really about goals or whatever. There's still a role that he could play on a team. So I would say that a team like Minnesota, he's not a guy that necessarily puts you over the top or anything like that. But in that kind of a situation, I think he could be a guy who could come in and still help a team, even though he's clearly on the downside. So
okay. Cup winner Tyler Johnson, who had 17 goals in 67 games with the Chicago Blackhawks. Frankly, I'll go first. Frankly, I'm surprised he hasn't been signed to a PTO by Tampa Bay because everybody who used to go to be with Tampa Bay always goes back on a cheap contract. So I'm going to say PTO, and I have Jan and Anthony agreeing with me, although Jan says 1-year deal. But I think PTO, and there may be an injury question here, but Russ, what do you think? PTO on your contract or nada for Tyler Johnson?
I think he's a PTO, but I also think he's a guy that needs to fit with a certain team, come in. I got to see what his speed's like now. Yes, he's a center, but he's a smaller center, and it's unfortunate, but the league's not giving a chance for most smaller center these days. So I got to see what he looks like, but I think he's worthy of at least a PTO.
Okay, Bill.
I think having been on so many winning teams alone keeps you landing somewhere. And even if it is a PTO, a team figures, we could move him at the deadline. You're not going to get more than a 5th, 6th round pick at this point.
Right.
But still, he's one of those guys who seems to land somewhere. Maybe a contender wants him stretch drive, a depth guy. But you're right that smaller centers basically need not apply.
Right.
But I think there are situations where he'd find a team. I'll say PTO, but a 1 year wouldn't shock me.
I'm literally surprised Chicago didn't re-sign him the way they've been throwing stupid money around on veteran guys on short-term contracts because they want to surround Bedard with with guy. I mean, Bertuzzi was not stupid money. I mean, it was a longer-term deal, but like the Mrazek deal, Jason Dickinson, Nick Foligno. It's like, wow, dude. Hey, I can skate. Can you sign me, please?
Yeah, but the thing is, he has to play second or third line. He can't play fourth. So that's another thing that kind of goes against him,
Right. Kevin Shattenkirk played last season with the Boston Bruins, 61 games. Played some in the playoffs, had 24 points, 35 years old, on the smaller side. 1 year contract, PTO or nada, Bill Meltzer.
I think teams are talking about shying away from small centers. Teams are shying away from small defensemen. We saw it at the draft. We saw it.
Oh yeah.
And in Philly, here having lived through the last year of Keith Yandle's NHL career, where there was nothing left, and I think Shattenkirk has a little more left than Yandle had at that point, but I think he's going to have a hard time landing a deal.
Yeah, I mean, Russ, especially if it's a smallish defenseman and he's slowing down.
Yeah, I mean, look, he has a winning attitude. He does.
Oh, for sure.
But it's a PTO because, like what Bill said, I mean, unless he could play on the power play, or unless I have a lot of bigger defensemen and he's just going to play, 10 minutes a game, it's going to be hard. But I'll say PTO because Shattenkirk's, been on winning team.
Anthony said PTO and then a 1 year deal, obviously. Jan said 1 year deal late. I think it's a PTO because I think teams are going to want to check out the goods before they sign on for a veteran minimum deal. Okay, Mike Hoffman, 34 years old, played all last year with the San Jose Sharks, only 10 goals. I mean, so was sort of relegated there. I think he was in Montreal and they got traded to San Jose. Once a great scorer, not anymore. I agree with Anthony and Jan. They both said nada. And Russ, what do you think?
Nothing, nada. He's not been good forever. Forget it.
We're going to be unanimous on this. He has to score to have a role.
Right.
He doesn't score regularly anymore. He really needs to be a top six guy.
Yeah.
And you're going to live with all the shortcomings in his game.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't score enough to do it. And plus two, still trying to live down a reputation as not being a great team guy.
Yeah.
So I don't see him.
He's definitely not signing in Pittsburgh with Carlson.
No.
Max Pacioretty, who missed a good early chunk of the year recovering from his second Achilles injury, but did come back. Did play. I saw him play a couple times. Did play well. Only had 4 goals. He's 35 years old. He was only making what was he making? $2 million last year. I think there's somebody out there that's going to give him a chance. But again, with the Achilles injuries, I don't know if they're going to give him a 1 year deal. So I think it's going to be like Shattenkirk. It's going to be a prove it to me. It's going to be a PTO. Ross, what do you think?
Well, I mean, look, even in Roman days, Achilles didn't have to come back from 2 Achilles injuries. So I think it's not. I think he'll be on his porch in Connecticut with his rocking chair, and he's had a nice career.
Yeah, and I think possibly, if he shows that he's healthy and whatever, maybe he's one of those guys who signs in season somewhere.
Yeah.
But I'll say PTO, but I'm not sure of his chances of actually making a team though.
Jan was so anxious to provide his list live that he's coming to us. So Max Pacioretty, I said PTO, and Bill and Russ gave their opinion. So Jan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think given how last year went, I'm going to go with either PTO or retire. I mean, clearly he's on the downside of his career, as we've seen. Ironically enough, he could have gone to the Rangers and declined to go there at the trade deadline, wanting to stay in Washington, and then they faced the Rangers in the first round. Didn't really do a heck of a lot that series, and unfortunately, injuries robbed a couple of years from him, or chunks of a couple of years the last several years. So given the downward trend, I would say maybe a PTO, but he may end up just hanging them up.
Yeah. Okay, so Jan, I'll go to you first on this one because you saw this guy play all of last year. He got hurt, and then he ended up coming back in the playoffs, which I give him a ton of credit for. Blake Wheeler, who had signed at $800,000, 37 years old. I haven't heard a retirement announcement, so I'm assuming he still wants to come back. 1-year contract, PTO or nada?
I'm going to say possibly PTO, though it wouldn't shock me also given the lack of interest. Part of it is, look, he doesn't have the foot speed he wants to have, right? Wheeler used to be known for that incredible speed. Clearly that dissipated over the last couple of years. And I wouldn't say he was very effective. He had spurts of being effective last year with the Rangers when he was healthy early on. And then, look, give him a ton of credit for making his way back, to work his way back to actually be eligible to play in the playoffs. Though he's definitely not a first liner. Could see him maybe being a third line player potentially, though not necessarily the role he's really been effective in the past, but big body kind of guy you can use a little bit on probably the second line power play. So I could see him getting maybe, a look-see late in early part, late in camp if there's an injury or he still wants to play. I don't think he's necessarily going to automatically hang him up, but I just don't see somebody giving him a 1-year contract right now.
Well, definitely not Winnipeg. Bill, what do you think on Blake Wheeler?
Well, so much mileage and coming off such a major injury. A team brings him in, passes a physical, looks okay, whatever. I maybe a 1-year deal. I think he can still create chances on a power play. Sees the ice so well. I think either a 1-year deal or he hangs them up. I don't think he'll take a PTO somewhere.
Russ, wouldn't it be weird if like life is a circle and he goes back and signs a 1-year deal with Boston? Because he was a 5th overall pick, I think, of Arizona.
Yeah, I was going to say I was at that draft.
Yeah.
I had no idea who Blake Wheeler was. I don't think Wayne Gretzky had any idea who Blake Wheeler was. Had a heck of a career, and it's just time. I don't think he gets a PTO.
Yeah, I think he gets a PTO, but I don't know if he makes it. So the thing is, if he goes someplace on a PTO, I think he wants some guarantees that they're going to give him a contract. And if he's going to go there and they're not going to guarantee him anything, then I think he says, forget it.
Yeah.
This one is surprising. Kailer Yamamoto is only 25 years old. He did not get a qualifying offer. Now he's had a bad couple years. I mean, when he was with Edmonton, I thought he was a up and coming player, just not producing. But I thought, he only had 8 goals in 59 games, but he's still young, Russ. And it's like, it's just baffling that somebody hasn't signed him yet. So 1-year contract, PTO or nada.
He's getting probably nada because unfortunately he's small and he doesn't play great defense, and so teams now aren't willing to bring him in to see what kind of offense he has, because I still do believe that, under the right circumstances, he could score you some goals, but he doesn't do a lot else, and so they're not going to risk it, and they're not going to invite him in.
Anthony said PTO, Jan, on Yamamoto.
Maybe PTO. I could see him being somebody who goes over to Europe to play. It seems to be that the game is kind of like perfect for that type of environment, whether or not it's the SHL, the KHL, or something along those lines. So, like I said, he had a good year and really thought with that year with Edmonton, he was taking that step forward, and then unfortunately regressed. And I think ever since then, he really hasn't been a prime option. So I would say Europe is more likely an option for him right now.
That's where I was going with it too. I could see him going to Switzerland, specifically.
SHL or Switzerland, maybe.
Yeah. Making good money for you, particularly the Swiss league. It's a good paying league. There's really no travel involved. I could see him being a high scoring guy over there, maybe playing in the World Championships, or other tournaments for Canada, trying to catch an eye, and then hoping he can parlay that to coming back into the NHL.
Yeah, he can play with Dennis Mulligan.
Yeah.
Okay. Russ, here's a guy who a couple years ago You know, he took less with San Jose to get a big deal. You know, he had a wink, wink, nudge, nudge agreement with Doug Wilson. Then he got paid, and then ever since he's just been not the same player. And that's Kevin LeBanc. Now he 28 years old, and he's not particularly big, so you know it's one of those deals where I mean, is he just in a sense like the guy we just talked about, too small and not fast enough?
Yeah, I love Kevin LeBanc coming out of Erie. I wrote about him. I was like, he's the OHL scoring leader. He wasn't even on Team USA for anything. Then they finally started putting him on. He had his time, and I do think he is a step slower now. He doesn't play great defense, and if he's not killing it on the power play like he used to, he's not going to be anywhere. So I don't think he's getting anything.
Phil?
I could see him on a one-year deal on a lower team in the league. You know, a rebuilding team, try to prove it, and like making no significant money, but a 1 year kind of prove it deal. If it doesn't work out, then he'd really be in trouble. But I could see him getting one more kick at the can in the NHL. He's been in one place his whole career. Maybe somebody figures, he needed a change of scenery. Maybe somebody figures that.
Anthony said PTO. Jan?
Europe. I mean, that's kind of where I think he's going to end up also right now. I mean, native New Yorker, so it's got, a couple of us knew, obviously, there was a lot of talk years ago that maybe the Rangers were going to end up dealing for him. That ship has shortly passed. Clearly, took the big deal, as you said, hasn't been the same ever since then. Maybe, as Bill said, somebody gives him an opportunity in camp if that happens to the PTO, but I'm expecting kind of where he'll go to Europe and maybe try to, make decent money for a year or two and see if he can parlay that into a look-see coming back, because he's not that old, as you said, Mike.
Yeah. If he could still score. Hello, Lou. He can still score. But I don't know. Okay. Stanley Cup winner, Nick Cousins. Honestly, I'm surprised he hasn't signed with Pittsburgh since he's from Sault Ste. Marie. He's a professional shit disturber of the highest order. Yep. I would say 1 year contract, but I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. So I'll start with you, Bill. What do you think?
Yeah, and some come up through the Flyers system. Some, even Florida this past year. He is a professional shit disturber. Absolutely, guys want to kill him on the ice. He will have a 1 year deal. And yes, I'm surprised too that it hasn't happened yet. Maybe he was thinking higher money than anybody was willing to offer. As you get close to camp in the season, players start to realize I better take what I can get. I think that he will get a 1 year deal somewhere.
Maybe he ends up back in Florida because Lomborg left and Stenlin left, and they're going to need somebody. But Jan, what do you think?
Well, if you ask half the league, they'd be basically paying for his plane ticket overseas just to get him out of the league right now. But there's clearly, look, as you said, he's a guy who knows his role. He plays it well. He's an agitator. He plays it to the nth degree. There's still clearly a place for that in the league. So, yeah, I would say as the calendar ticks closer to September and camps open, somebody will end up giving him a 1 year deal. As I look at maybe like an $800,000 1 year deal.
Russ?
I think you'll get a PTO. I think if you wanted a team to sort of wake up in training camp, you bring him in. I think a team like Ottawa, who still, to me, has just guys that are just like not lost, but just need some direction. And you got a Brady Tkachuk there, and you want a little spark and a little fireworks, and you want to like get a little life out of your camp. And if he somehow fits in, then you give him a 1 year deal. I think it would be a situation like that.
I as somebody who's a watcher of the Atlantic Division, I hope he ends up outside of the Atlantic Division because he just stirs up too much controversy. And last,
put him with Boston. Let him play with Marchand. The two of them. Come on.
I just put him with Brady Tkachuk. This is good.
Marchand and Zadorov. That would be fantastic. Okay, and last but not least, 40-year-old Mark Giordano, who played 46 games for the Leafs, had a concussion middle of the season, came back, played down the stretch, didn't play in the playoffs. Reportedly wants to continue his career. Doesn't seem like it's going to be in Toronto because I think Toronto has sort of moved on. And it's ironic because Brad Treliving was the GM that had him moved on from Calgary. So he's moved on from him twice. There was some talk about him possibly going to San Jose where they had a need on defense, but I don't know whether he's willing to go someplace just to continue this career. So if I had to guess, I think it's Nada. I think he's going to end up retiring. Jan, what do you think?
Yeah, same. I mean, I think just the recovery from the concussion, lack of foot speed, game has changed a little bit. Good career, but yeah, I think the time has come and he's going to hang him up.
Anthony said Nada. Bill?
I think he ends up retiring also.
Yeah. Russ?
Yeah, I mean, he's older than Ryan Suter. I think he's retiring.
So
Well,
what?
because Ryan Suter barely
So
does.
Chris Chelios, he played till 47.
Listen, okay. Go look at the film with Chelios playing in Atlanta.
I know. All right, good job, guys. We'll be back on Friday with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast for Bill Meltzer, for Jan Levine, for Russ Cohen. I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.